What about where's the
Hey, let's go begin. So it is April the 6th, and we are going over our U.S. government slides. And so today we're going to talk a little bit and a little bit more on voter registration and a couple more things. I don't quite remember off the top of my head, but we'll see. So last time we left off talking about presidential elections and the selection of candidates. Remember, that comes from the process where the parties choose their candidate. And if you're in a third party, yeah, that's too bad, because you're probably not going to make it to any debates or anything like that, because the debates are actually held by private organizations, and they normally don't let third parties in anyways. However, you can still get on the ballot. It's just expensive, and nobody's going to know who you are. So, of course, you might know from U.S. history that usually leads to a pretty big upset election. All right, so let's see a little bit about money and politics, right? So there's rules on how these things are supposed to work. But if you ever pay attention to the news, you might see that money is often funneled in, and both parties are accused of this through means that are kind of shady. So one might accuse this party of getting money from foreign entities, and another might accuse a party from getting money from, let's say, large corporations, but divided up into small satellite corporations to hide it. You know, there's a lot of different ways these things are done. So in the United States, there is a principle in the First Amendment, the United States Constitution, that people have the right to free speech. Yeah. One way in which people speak is through the media, through advertising, statements on radio, television, and through the printed speech. The court, several decisions, has ruled that the government restrict the amount of money that any individual or organization can give to a campaign or political party. The rationale for these limits is limits on individual contributions can reduce the perception of election fraud, electoral manipulation. At times in our history, we have been very careful to try to make sure that things look like they're on the up and up, right? And so if you think about, like, you might remember in the Gilded Age, a lot of Wall Street tycoons, big oil guys would essentially literally buy senators and bribe Congress and things like that, and judges to make laws and rulings that were in their favor. Stop, but that used to be out in the open back then. And so the country, during the time of, like, say, Teddy Roosevelt, and moving on from there, the progressive movement has tried to rein in on some of this corruption. So try to make sure that the republic isn't falling apart, because that's some of the problems we had with the Roman Republic. With the Roman Republic, there was a lot of financial corruption, especially with the politicians. And they think it's a lot of the fall of the republic and the rise of the empire. So, and then, of course, some commentators said it was corruption that led to the fall of the empire. But
during, even towards like whenever it was still like democratic, there and like the Senate, they would buy themselves like, hey, before everybody gets like five dinars.
Oh yeah. Bread and Circuses was the name of the game back then. I mean, even during the time when the Senate didn't matter that much, emperors would do it just to keep people quiet, because the political power was all in Rome, and as long as you can keep the political power base in Rome happy, you don't really care too much about the provinces as long as they were paying their taxes. But I mean, even in our first presidential election, George Washington would hand out cider, I mean, from his own apple orchards. He'd have a brewed up hard cider, and he'd say, "Hey, vote for me, have a drink." I mean, it wasn't seen as corruption back then. I think the thought of it was a bit more kind of like, look, I'm a good host. Don't you think I make a great president too? I don't think it was necessarily like, I'll get you drunk if you vote for me. I mean, maybe it was a little bit of that, but I don't know. Georgie was a nice guy. So it's supposed to be, there's supposed to be a limit on how much an individual can contribute. What's an individual, though? Well, that's where things are going to get a little muddy.
Oh yeah, because like someone could just like get, someone that works for them to do it. And it would, with.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, you can do that. Like, sometimes super rich donors are accused of doing that, like making up what we call separate PACs or even companies that can do donations for them. So they can channel money through various means into just one candidate. And if you follow the web, it all goes back to one person. Kind of like for Republicans, the Koch brothers were accused of that. For Democrats, yeah, people look like George Soros and people like that, or Bloomberg and stuff. So, yeah, there's always a worry that big money is manipulating politics, right? All right. So continue. However, individuals have a right to engage in as much speech as they want, as long as they do not directly coordinate that speech with a campaign. So they're saying here is that election campaigns are supposed to have official messages. However, you can't necessarily have people going out there. It's kind of like proxies, right? In the United States, there are also legal concept that corporations and similar entities are persons. So if you're going to sue a corporation, they can represent themselves and have legal standing as a person. This kind of came up so that they could have a defense in court, because corporations can hold patents and things like that might necessarily need to be defended every now and again. But you can see that corporations can also act as persons in order to donate to political campaigns. So therefore, corporations and trade unions are also allowed to engage in as much speech as they want. In practical terms, there are two implications that arise from this free speech right. So that's individuals act as individuals. The first, individuals can spend as much money as they want on their own campaign. So for example, Governor Mitt Romney or President Barack Obama, it was like 2014 estimate, want to spend $5 billion of their own money on their campaign. There's no law that would prevent this. Remember, Trump did that. He dumped like his own money into his presidential. Well, Mitt Romney, he was a millionaire. I think he dumped a lot of his money into his own campaign as well. So you can always do that. However, we're going to see that if someone else wants to donate money to you, there's going to be a price tag, or there's going to be a limit, there's going to be a ceiling to that. So,
As long as that person is being influenced by a major power.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, you can see that there's some good and bad with this. The good is that if you're donating a lot of your own monies, people could say, oh, look at that. They're not bought and paid for by somebody else. But the bad thing could be like, oh, look, they bought the presidency. So you could see it cutting both ways, All right. Second part, in the Supreme Court case, Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, the court ruled that corporations and unions have the right to make unlimited independent political expenditures. For example, if a corporation wants to run advertisements criticizing a candidate or advocating a policy position, they can generally do so without limits. Individuals and corporations are often engaged in this speech during what's referred to as super PACs. And I think we've seen a bit more of that in the past 20 years than we have any other time in U.S. history. Usually, industries and corporations stay out of the political sphere, at least overtly, because it's usually bad for business. I think nowadays we see a little bit more politicization of private businesses. Technically known as independent expenditure-only committees, super PACs may raise unlimited sums of money from corporations, unions, associates, and individuals. They spend unlimited sums to overtly advocate for or against political candidates. Super PACs, however, report their donors. So this is like, think of this as like a charity organization that can be for or against a candidate. It's not part of the candidate's campaign, but it could be for a specific thing. It could be like we were talking about the Second Amendment. You could have a super PAC for the Second Amendment and one against it. You could have this for all kinds of things, right down to maybe oil taxes for or against, green energy, just, like family issues, lots of things. And so we see these kind of things all the time. And some of you might have family members who contribute to certain ones for one direction or another. Sometimes even if you go through a drive-through, you might be asked to donate $1 to something. So, and that organization might do some charity work, but they might also act as a super PAC. So, campaign tactics and strategies. Candidates attempt to mobilize their supporters. Well, yeah, demobilize the supporters of their opponents, yep, and sway the allegiances of individuals who do not have strong party preferences. We call those swing voters. So a lot of people are pretty polarized, but you got that center ground where they might go this direction or the other as far as the candidates. Campaigns engage in an array of activities to achieve these goals. Now, nowadays, a lot of this is actually done where you can actually buy data collection from private organizations that collect private users' data collection from things like what they can get open source from the internet. Like, what kind of car do you drive? What kind of music do you normally listen to? What are your activities you normally seem to favor on the internet? And they're able to tell from that information that there's a strong correlation. You're going to vote Democrat or Republican. And so then what you have these campaigns do, that's when they start sending out a lot of personalized advertisements to you. So it might be through your web browser, through political advertisements when you're using the YouTube video. It might be something in the mailbox, but they might know, they might have a suggestion based on what they know on you and your purchase history that you might vote for their candidate if they can convince you. And so this is actually a really big thing. President Obama, it was made famous that he actually had a really good IT team that was able to put this together. And after that, Ted Cruz used similar methods when he was running for president against Donald Trump in the Republican campaign. And now it's become more and more normal to where they're using more and more of your open available internet data. Trust me, law enforcement uses this as well. Like, even when I worked for the state, I used to work for some investigators, and this was like 10 years ago. And some of the special investigators had systems where they could use correlations just based on your purchasing history, your bills, where you went to school, your web browser history, just to tell who your friends most likely are. So in case you come up missing, they know who to question. So all that stuff was out there back then. And don't worry, it's probably a lot better now. So running advertising on radio, television, and newspaper and magazines on the internet. This advertising may tout the positive attributes of a candidate and the candidate's policies, or expose negative aspects of a candidate or her policies. So, you know that, candidates are always, like in their campaigns, are always talking bad about the other. Sometimes it's just bold-faced lies. Sometimes it's the truth. Sometimes they take things out of context. Or sometimes I might overblow things. But don't worry, all politicians lie to you. So let's go to the next one. So more on this. Contacting likely voters by going door to door, using email, Twitter, Facebook, telephone calls, direct mail. So, campaigns often know quite a bit about the types of people who vote for or against their party. Hey, I'm psychic. Campaigns use this information to target specific messages to voters. So yeah, based on your interest. So for example, an individual who belongs to an environmental group may receive direct mail touting how one candidate is pro-environment and the other candidate is anti-environment. So, because we know there's a lot of people out there who want to just get rid of the environment. All right. Campaigns also attempt to mobilize voters using free media, which involves, in quotes, getting the local and national media to cover events or issues of interest of one of the parties. For example, campaigns will hold large rallies in a city, hoping voters will attend, and also hoping that the local or the national news will show up. So if you have a really big rally, they bring the cameras because it's good ratings, right? And ratings mean you get more advertising dollars, and it helps your job. So, here we go. Debates. Candidates in election often engage in face-to-face debates where the moderator or panel of individuals asks the candidates questions about policies and issues. In 2012, 3 presidential debates were held from October 322 to 2012. 2 debates focused on both domestic and foreign policy. The 1 debate focused solely on foreign policy. I think I remember that one. I mean, I usually watch them. I don't know. I think I've watched almost all the debates since Bush left office. I don't think I really cared about politics until he was like leaving office. There was also 1 debate held between vice presidential candidates. It's usual to have just one between vice presidential candidates. Usually people don't watch those. The first televised presidential debates were held during the 1960 election between JFK and Richard Nixon. You might remember that from U.S. history last year. No debates were held again until 1976 election, and since then, debates have been held every presidential election. And that was one thing, like they were talking about, like with the COVID lockdown. They're like, hey, maybe we won't have them this year, or maybe we'll do them through Skype. But luckily, they had them face to face, and they were different. So this is the last section. Who votes? The United States, all citizens over the 18 years of age are potentially eligible to vote. So if you're 18, as long as you're not a felon, but that's usually a state-by-state thing. A state could say, hey, all felons who are 18 years old or over can vote in our state. Because remember, the states have full authority to decide who can and cannot vote. That's in the Constitution. Unless it counters one of these things. And you cannot discriminate based on race, ethnicity, gender, economic status, or age. As we see in the 15th Amendment, prohibits the denial of suffrage based on race, color, previous condition of servitude. That's one of the Civil War, one of the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. The 19th established women's suffrage, so women got the right to vote too. We just had the centennial of that, remember? Not that long ago, this school year. 24th prohibits the revocation of voting rights due to non-payment of poll taxes. So, voting has to be free of charge. 26 established the official voting age to 18 years old. There have been talks about lowering it in some states. So who votes? States can still exclude certain people from voting. All states exclude non-citizens from voting. Well, I don't know. There's been talk. I think, didn't California go the other way around on that? I don't remember. In the 1800s, non-citizens were able to vote in many states. So it was hard to monitor back then. There was no source of national identification, such as driver's license or anything like that. In addition, all but 2 states restrict felons from voting. I think that number's grown since then. I think a couple more states have started allowing felons to vote recently. Some states give a felon the right to vote once they have completed their time in prison. Some require a felon to have completed all probation and parole. And some states ban felons from voting unless the state actively restores their rights, like a governor gives you a pass. In 2008, 89.86% of people who were registered to vote cast their ballot. So if you are registered to vote, there's a high percent chance you're going to use it. However, only 71% of eligible voters are registered to vote. That's kind of a main thing, because if you remember, I told you the story about people who voted in the first elections in Iraq after the invasion of Iraq. It was like over 90% people voted, and a lot of people died to cast that vote. But in America, a lot of people, I think, are watching Netflix. So if we all took, when we look at the percentage of eligible voters who did vote, we see that only 63.6% of eligible citizens voted in 2008. And that's pretty standard. It's pretty normal. We usually have a pretty low turnout across the nation. I don't remember what it was for the last election, but I think statistically it was supposed to have been a lot higher. And so
This election?
yeah, I think so.
Oh.
I think a lot of it because we had extensions. I'm just gonna Google it. All right, I think it's because we had extensions on the window ballots to be accepted, and we've had an expansion in mail-in ballots we've never seen before either. So, election, OT work, turn out, 2020. Always hate getting these. Well, the Washington Post says over 65%. So that sounds normal then, right? They're saying here on NBC News, turnout increased in every state by 98%.
No, it said in 98%, so
I mean,
in 98% of areas.
Thing is, well, Pew might be good. They do a lot of polling and stuff like that. Just give me the number. Oh, well, that's not that high. It's 66.2. Okay, so maybe it wasn't anything special. Whatever. All right, kids, that's going to cut it for today. Thank you for your time and your patience. Please study some of this stuff. Let me give you a quiz on Thursday. I don't know if we're going to be in this room or not, but we're not going to have a lecture. So see you later. I know, right? Now I got to find some